Hey, it's Leo Simpson II here, coming to you for the second challenge experience in day one of the 9-day transformation challenge focused on family, business, life, putting you on the trajectory to achieve mastery in family, business, life. Listen, I see people popping into the chat. Great to see you. And listen, if you're following by on demand, is exciting. You might can be on the YouTube side and put some comments there. Certainly do that to add value to the people who are on the other side. I want to really set the tone for what this is going to be today, but also for the rest of the 9 days. This is lunch and learn. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a lunch and learn. It's basically where you're going to lunch, and while you're at that lunch, you're learning. Well, you can do this from your desk. You can do it while riding in your vehicle. You can do it while at the restaurant by yourself sitting. We can be sitting together today, right? But I want to put you in a position to where there's a challenge over the next 9 days, including Saturday and Sunday, to challenge yourself about making it a priority to be challenged about family life, business life, and how they are to work in a certain manner that you might not be leveraging right now. And so we're going to focus on a number of different subjects over the course of this 9 days, and they're very intentional. But one thing I want to make sure you understand is that the focus is so you are able to be challenged and then transform. Now, first 3 days are primarily going to be challenging the beliefs you currently have, challenging beliefs that you may not know you have, challenging beliefs that need to be dealt with at a very core and fundamental level. So, let me go ahead and give some introduction to what it is that we're focusing on today so that we can get into this and start learning while you're on lunch. Now, some of you might want to do lunch in a way to where this is actually your food, where you're feeding your spirit, feeding your soul, and maybe not feeding your body. That's okay too. And that's a pretty good challenge to engage yourself in. So, we want to start today with asking the question, does balance make sense? Okay, let's get this question in our mind. And I think that you might already be answering the question from a different perspective with a question. What does he mean? What is he talking about? What is it that Leo is getting to? Well, I'm not going to get into that just yet, but I do want us to think about balance. Think about what balance is, what balance means, what balance speaks to, what balance is really designed for in order to move in a direction where there's actually value being delivered, being experienced in the context of family life and business life. So, we're going to talk about some things today and go in the direction of positioning you all to think about balance from a different perspective. So let me jump over to the next one here. So let me give you some perspective about what this 9 days is going to look like. You see these number threes here. You got three misleading beliefs, three accurate beliefs, and three master keys. And just to be very transparent, direct, honest, and all the words that you can imagine, what you can gain from what you see on the screen is that each day is going to focus on one of these perspectives. For the first 3 days, we're going to focus on misleading beliefs, which means the first 3 days are going to be dedicated to primarily challenging us, right? Challenging what we believe and bringing it to the surface. literally getting to the place to where we are willing to carefully, methodically, and very intentionally look into our beliefs about family life and business life. Then we're going to deal with the accurate beliefs. Then we're going to deal with the master keys that are able to be leveraged, accessed, made use of in order to put us on the trajectory, the course for achieving family, business, life mastery. Okay. So let me talk about these three misleading beliefs at the height, at the core level, why they're so important. They're important because remember, we're here challenging for the purpose of transformation, family life, and business life so that we can see it from a perspective that we have seen it and probably should see it and all those good things. The question we have to ask as it pertains to the pervasive problem of family life crashing and burning while business life is thriving and vibing, especially for CEOs, business owners, and executives, is what causes this pervasive problem of family life crashing and burning while business life is thriving and vibing. And it is the misleading beliefs. These misleading beliefs are at the core of why family life crashes and burns while business life thrives and vibes. And if you were participating in the mastermind experience early this morning, I shared there the reality that the truth is that family life crashing and burning while business life thriving and vibing is really an illusion. Why? Because family life crashing and burning means that there is only a matter of time before business life begins to crash and burn as well. It's an illusion. One of the reasons that business life continues to perceptively thrive and vibe is because there are certain thought processes, systems, strategies that are at work that are yielding value, not necessarily that we put in place, but that are in place from others well before us that is yielding value today from a fruitful and productive standpoint. So at some point, there's a matter of time before the thrive and vibe turns into crash and burn for business life, just like family life, if that's happening. But what you've got to understand, the reason that family life crashes and burns is not only absolutely because of the three misleading beliefs, but also, listen very carefully, because the misleading beliefs actually communicate a lack of understanding and perspective at the core of really who and what we are. All right. So let's look at this from a standpoint of what is misleading belief number one. Before I get into that, I want to share with you that my background in my career trajectory has in it survey research analyst as one of the main roles that I had. And as such, I was an analyst, I was a researcher, and I was somebody who focused on surveys. So I did a combination of the three. And there was one moment in my experience as a survey research analyst where I was working on the analysis portion, dealing with a particular report function that I was needing to take care of. And as I was dealing with analyzing my data and providing actual verbiage to what I was seeing the numbers say, what ended up happening was I made a statement that my supervisor observed and then asked a question. Here was the statement somewhat. I said, well, based on this data, it can be concluded that, and I went on to say some other things. And my supervisor stopped me and said, okay, let me ask you a question. how did you come to that conclusion? What is it that you looked at in the data that, said this or that? And I said, well, it wasn't that the data said this. It was when the data said this, I looked at it from this perspective and I was like, oh, see, I know what that is and that problems and so on and so forth. He said, well, okay, that might be true. However, we cannot say that because if we say that in this way, what's going to happen is we're going to be concluding something without the data supporting it, and it's going to actually position the people using the data to make an improper decision related to the data. I was like, huh. So he said, we can't say this concludes. We can say, well, based on this, this is saying X, and as a result of X, it could infer that this might be the case, but it will require more analysis, more study, and a deeper dive into what's going on. What was he trying to tell me? It's important to make sure you use the right measure when you're dealing with not only the analysis of the data, but also the reporting of the analysis of the data. Well, in the same way with family life and business life, we have to understand that there are measures within the context of family life and business life that enable us to know. I'm just checking on some data here. That enables us to know if we are doing what we need to do the way we need to do it. Let me do some checks real quick here, folks. Let me do some checks, make sure everything is good. I got a notice about the video, so let me look into it. Let me look into it. Let's see here. Okay. I want this to be a good experience for y'all. Let's see here. All right. All right. I'm checking. I'm checking. All right. Sometimes you got to do these things. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. All right. So I got some folks watching on our side. On the other side, let me if things are good, a little challenging. All right. Do check your connections on that side too, folks. So let us move back into where we were. All right. Measures. Measures are important because measures communicate where we are and where we're going. Okay. And so when we think about balance, we have to ask this question: does balance make sense with regard to family life and business life? And so as we talk about this first misleading belief, let's look at what it is. This first misleading belief is work life balance. Here's what you need to understand about work life balance. First and foremost, balance doesn't make sense. Why does balance not make sense? Remember, I told you measures are important. So, if we're saying we want to balance work and life, what needs to happen is we need to use balance as a measure of what's happening between work and life. But first problem is balance as a measure is not a suitable measure for family life and business life. But notice what you see on the screen. You see work life balance. I'm saying family life and business life. This says work life. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about work and life. I have some content on my YouTube channel that goes through this, but I want to basically communicate this: work and life are essentially synonymous. And how you know that is this: I always use the perspective of me not having any more parents. All of my parents are deceased, grandparents and great grandparents, all those people prior to them. And I ask the question, can they work? The answer is no, they can't work. Why can't they work? They cannot work because they have no life. And if they had life, everything about their existence would be based on work because work takes place on the inside, even when we're not doing anything. If our organs are not doing the things that they ought to do, they're not working. So you have to do some other things that help them work. I'll give you an example. My wife is a social worker in the renal industry, the renal care industry, where she provides support and care for those people who have lost kidney function and they have to experience dialysis in order to filter their kidneys, their bloodstream, all that kind of stuff. Well, when it comes down to it, the reality of those folks' situation is that their kidneys stop working. You got it. The kidneys stop working. They have life, but there is a limitation of life and function in their kidneys to where they need some external support, some external work in order to help their kidneys to work. Some of them only have one. Okay. Anyhow, what you've got to understand is work and life being essentially the same, therefore cannot be separated. So, in and of themselves, they cannot be balanced. So, is balance the measure that makes sense? Because if I'm trying to balance something that can't be separated, that needs to have the ability to produce equal weights and measure, if I can't balance these because they can't be separated, then that means what? Listen carefully. It means that balance is not the measure to utilize. So, therefore, balance doesn't make sense. But also, work life balance doesn't make sense because to achieve work life balance is not even possible. Now, we're not going to talk about what is possible. That's going to come on day 5, I think it is. No, day 4, I believe it is, related to balance. What is it that would dispel balance? But you've got to deal with, does balance make sense? In other words, in other areas of your life, you want to be in a position to where you continue to ask the question, do these things work? Are these things working? Do these things produce value? Are they actually producing something of benefit? Are they actually creating progress consistent with the progress that ought to be experienced? More than anything, I want you to take this question: does balance make sense? And position yourself to evaluate your beliefs, things you believe about family life and business life and anything else in your life, and say, I can ask these questions to determine if this makes sense or not. Because the truth be told, sometimes in many instances, we're being sold a bill of goods. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday. I said, I'd like to find the person who came up with this idea of work-life balance. Why? Because what they're essentially saying is work is business life, and then life is family life. But you gotta understand, business is life, family is life. Relationships are life. Transactions are life. So many things are really a function of life, and life is what it is because of work. Oh, that's a whole nother message by itself, but I don't wanna get too deep into that. So what I want you all to make sure that you understand in the context of this work-life balance, and does balance make sense, is you've got to have the right perspective about balance on the basis of measures and understanding how we as we were talking with, James earlier today, he said it, I know this is sound like a broken record, I'm repeating myself, and I'm just going over and over again. He said, "How we do anything is how we do everything." And as it pertains to measures, how you measure one thing is how you're gonna measure other things. And what I mean by how you measure one thing is how you're gonna measure other things, it means that if you are habitually and consistently using wrong measures in things that are important or insignificant, you're going to get better, more so worse, at using wrong measures and actually getting results, but not the right results. James talked about the difference between high performance and peak performance earlier in the mastermind. And the way that he explained it, it helped me to understand, even in the context of measures, how important it is to see our performance from a basis consistent with our nature. Listen, when you deal with peak performance, what you're essentially saying is, I'm always going to be a failure rather than a winner. Here's why. Because if I'm always a failure, okay, if I'm always a failure, listen to me carefully. If I'm always a failure, that means no matter what I excel at, I'm always going to go down. But if I pursue it from a winner's perspective, from a victor's perspective, from a perspective of instead of peak performance, but high performance, what's ultimately being communicated and conveyed is that I am able to, listen carefully, I am able to excel and ascend no matter what setbacks or situations I experience. See, to experience peak performance means to succumb at times, often, because peak means you're going to get to a certain point and then come down, get to a certain point and come down. But high performance says, I'm always going to persevere. I'm always going to subdue my situation no matter what's happening. So, if I'm dealing with performance and I'm dealing with the measure of peak versus high, am I gonna get 1, a different result? And 2, am I going to have a different mindset? And that goes back to why it's important to look at, listen carefully, does balance make sense? In regard to family life and business life, you need the right measure in order to progress in family life and business life. And I can't tell you how important that is. So let me get into some things as we get ready to shift toward the bottom of this hour. When you give consideration to balance and measuring, it's important to make sure that we're not looking at work-life balance. What you pursue, let's say it differently. What you focus on is what you actually put your intention on, and therefore your energy flows in the direction of that where your focus goes. I told, my basketball players last summer, I said, energy flows where focus goes, right? Let me just say it again. Energy flows where focus goes, right? So if you're focusing on balance and then you're focusing on work and life balance, you're focusing on something that is ultimately unproductive for you. If you focus on balance in the context of work-life balance, you're focusing on something that is essentially unproductive for you. Now, this is what you need to focus on. You need to focus on family life and business life. Family life and business life. Family life and business life. Therefore, eliminate work-life balance. Now, we'll talk again on, I think it's day 4, about what you do instead of balance, but I want to make sure you're being challenged about, does balance make sense? Sometimes we talk about beating the dead horse. Well, this is not a dead horse. This is a live horse that actually needs to be addressed. This horse is not dead. Work-life balance is still a huge conversation. Matter of fact, I wanna pull up some statistics for you that were shared with me related to family life crashing and burning under the context of work-life balance, right? Let me pull this up over here. It's coming up. Okay. 60% of employees believe they have a good work-life balance. Let me explain what they're really saying. They've achieved some results in family life and business life having a level of congruence, and as a result of that, they believe they have a good work-life balance. Let me explain something about belief briefly. I don't wanna get too deep, but I wanna make sure we understand why it's important that we deal with our beliefs. It's important we deal with our beliefs because of the structure of our existence, the very construct of who and what we are as human beings. As human beings, we are three-part beings, all right? These are some things that I really got into the depth of when my father passed, because my father's passing, of all the people who have passed in my life, was one that really touched me to the core, connected with my identity. And when it comes down to it, you've got to see that when we memorialize, funeralize, celebrate the lives of people who have passed on, ultimately what we're doing is giving regard for a life lived in a body. But that person who was in that body is not in that body, and that person's absence communicates to us that that person is actually a different type of creature, more so a different type of being, a different type of essence, okay? My father, myself, and all of you are spiritual beings. We have a spirit, a human spirit. And that human spirit then influences our soul. And our soul is the thing that gives source to our life, which actually is the flowing essence from our spirit that communicates that we are alive and awakened, which is why our blood flows, which is why our blood is oxygenated. The spirit within us resonates with the oxygen outside of us, as well as the one that's inside of us, all the things that we do with inhaling and exhaling. As it pertains to that, what happens is our soul then gives source and function to our body. In other words, the part of us that is really driving our body is actually our soul. And the part of our soul, the part of us that is driving our soul, is actually our spirit. It's delegated authority. It's hierarchical authority, to be honest. But what you need to know is the soul is then broken up into 3 parts as well. It's very interesting. The soul is broken up into mind, will, and emotions. Mind, will, and emotions. This is why it's very important that we deal with the misleading beliefs, especially this first one of work-life balance, trying to achieve balance, because the belief is not primary influence in our soul. It is the secondary influence. Our primary influence comes from our mind, which is the source of our influence in our soul, which is our thoughts. Our thoughts have 2 different layers that they operate with. They operate with the layer of subconscious and conscious. So the subconscious and the conscience have a way of functioning, but the conscience way of thinking and doing is really at the level of our body flowing from the function of our soul. I'm not trying to get too deep on you. Just follow Leo for a moment. When it comes down to it, I want you to understand that what you think influences what you believe, and what you believe influences what you not only feel, but the energy in motion that influences what you do in your body. What comes out in how you move, how you engage, how you exercise, how you impact, how you interact. All of those things flow from, first and foremost, your thoughts. So, whatever your beliefs are, it tells you what your thinking is, which is why it's so important to deal with mindset. Now, let me explain this. Let's go back to these statistics. It says 60% of employees believe they have a good work life balance, which means they all have a misleading belief because what they think they should be pursuing is not what they ought to be pursuing. But the fact that they believe that they have a good work-life balance, they might actually have some good fruitfulness and productivity related to their family life, okay, which is good, but what's important is they really are not measuring it appropriately, therefore, they're not communicating it appropriately, and so they're not truly getting the true benefits from the so-called work-life balance. They might be getting some congruence, some things working together, but if they cannot intelligibly and very clearly communicate it, they are limited in what it is that they're experiencing, okay? Here's another statistic. 77% of employees have experienced burnout at least once in their current jobs. Once? At least once. See, one of the things you've gotta know about measures is the words that you use to describe the thing you're measuring is very, very, very important, but also it's very telling of what it is you think. For example, when I see this, I see 77% of employees have experienced burnout at least once. From a statistical perspective, having a data analyst type of background, I know that there was probably a range of people, probably from 1 to maybe 10 or more. Who knows? That number is not communicated here, but when they say at least once, one of the reasons that they communicated this data this way is because they wanted to capture an effect of a cause in order to deal with something in a unique manner as far as seeking a solution. Here's another statistic. 72% of workers believe work-life balance is a very important factor when choosing a job. And 57% of job seekers say a poor work-life balance is a deal breaker when they're considering a new job. Now, I don't know how many people were in this study, but let me tell you this. Number one problem is that they are dealing with the wrong measure. And let me tell you about dealing with the wrong measure. It is consistent with insanity. Why? Because you're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. 72% of workers in this study believe work-life balance is a very important factor when choosing a job. Let me say it differently. Let me tell you how it sounds. What if it was in the correct way stated? 72% of workers believe that having family life and business life be congruent is a very important factor when choosing a job. Now listen to me carefully. Didn't that sound better? The reason it sound better is because there was intention with the articulation of these 2 vitally important aspects of our life. I just wanna put them back on the screen so we can have them visually before us. More than anything, I want you to get from this session that balance is not the right measure, and that work, life are essentially synonymous, such that we need to make sure we describe and communicate these 2 vitally important areas of our life appropriately: family life and business life. Now, these are 2 independent functions, but they have a nature and a dynamic that we're going to get into actually on day 3, or start to get into at least, that communicates that there's some type of relationship that should take place here. So much and so one of the pivotal perspectives we have used in promoting this 9-day transformation challenge is family life and business life are meant to be teammates, not opponents. And when you actually go with, first and foremost, this misleading belief of work-life balance, the first thing that happens is you pit family life and business life against each other simply because there's not intention about them. If there was intention about family life and business life, there would be no opposition by default in between them. There might be some from the standpoint of neglect, but not just by default. There's a problem between them to where one is crashing and burning, the other is thriving and vibing perceptively. And it's because the way our minds are wired to think, we are not rightly assessing and pursuing with the right perspective what our family life and our business life should be and should look like, because we have just accepted this thought process of work life balance. Now, let me just be honest with you. I accepted it at one point myself. I was, I haven't said it a lot, but I said it enough. I was one of those people that went with the status quo, as we say, right? And that status quo is something that we really have to fight against. Let me tell you why we need to fight against the status quo. We don't need to fight against the status quo in order to just fight the status quo. The status quo is a problem when we don't use our intelligence and the very framework of our imagination that's designed to be the context of our value we give. See, here's what happens. If the status quo says everybody should do X, and we do it because the status quo says everybody should do X, then are we really delivering the value, one, that is consistent with our potential, and two, that is consistent with the solutions to the problems we're able to provide? No. You know, it took me 10 years to really articulate and speak the very clarity of what my assignment is, simply because I was accepting an idea from my environment that communicated that I just needed to be great in serving, and whatever my hands found to do, I just needed to do it. Mm. Now, there is a passage of scripture that says, "Whatever your hands find to do, do with all your might." But it doesn't say just do it. It says do with all your might, meaning, watch this. If I'm a terrible wrestler, should I be in the ring wrestling? No. It doesn't matter how much might I have. The truth is I don't have wrestler might. I'm not equipped to be a wrestler. So, just because wrestling looks kinda cool, if it does not fit with the framework of what I'm capable of, guess what I need to do? I don't need to do that. Now, if I'm good at the hoops, that's putting basketball in the hole. If I'm good at that, or if I'm good at running, my brother said this about me. He said, "Man, if there was somebody who should have been running and been a part of, probably in the Olympics or something like that, should have been him." Talking about me. Well, my brother was right. I said the same thing and never had told my brother this. I shouldn't have been playing basketball and football and anything that wasn't really track related. I should have been running cross country and running track and maybe some field events in track. Why? Because that's where my might was, right? And so when it comes to how we deal with life, we need to deal with it in the context of what is expected of us. What is it that we are not only expected to do for the benefit we get, but also for the benefit we provide? And with that, balance. See, me personally, I maybe wouldn't have a problem if we at least said work, life, something else that was an appropriate measure. But balancing, because especially these 2 are 2 aspects of life that are essentially synonymous and really cannot be separated. When you put one on this side, then guess what? It's almost really like a seesaw effort. We're just going back and forth, which is why you can never achieve balance. So does balance make sense? I'm just gonna say no, and I think you can agree no, but let me tell you what the question is really designed to do. This question is designed to say to you, challenge what you think and believe. Challenge the beliefs and the thoughts you have. First and foremost, because you have the authority and power to challenge them. Challenge those thoughts and belief. You're the king of your heart. You're the king of your mind. You're the king who sits on the throne of your pursuits. Let no one, not even the status quo of your family experiences, tell you what you ought to do without you challenging it and determining if it's of value, if it makes sense for you. You've got to do that. Does balance make sense? It's not just balance. Does anything make sense? What makes sense should be pursued not just in that it feels good, but it is consistent with that which is good and the value that you can not only give, but can reciprocate. See, let me say this to you. Again, I said work-life balance doesn't work, can never work because of the very context of its framework. And understand how many people, I just gave you some statistics. How many people are pursuing something that's never achievable, thinking it's able to be achieved, and what does that say about the value that they are not unleashing? Watch this, in their family lives and business lives. I mean, just think about that. Even me, myself, you yourself, you very likely did not think about what I'm sharing with you in the way that you're thinking about it today and in the way that I shared it with you. But because you're thinking about it differently, whether you're thinking about it exactly how I said it or not, there's been a challenge to where you have been positioned and postured to experience transformation. And what is that transformation related to? That transformation is related to you being able to now experience the true fullness of value related to family life and business life. I'm gonna put it back up. I'm gonna put it back up. This right here. First and foremost, we've got to know that balance is not the measure. And so we've moved this measure out. Now we've moved that measure of balance out. Now we're still with work life. Does work life make sense? Right? We started with balance. Does balance make sense? No. But does work life make sense? Well, we established that it does not because they essentially synonymous and there are evidences by people in our own lives who we love dearly and are no longer here to physically work with us that communicates that work and life are essentially synonymous. So we must then ask the question, does work life make sense? And I want you to know emphatically that the answer is no. Family life and business life makes sense because when you actually begin to make them do what they're supposed to do, you can get something called family business life mastery. You can begin to, like we talked about earlier in this morning's mastermind, experience the high performance effect as it relates to family life and business life. Oh my goodness, this is exciting. Now, as I close, I really took some time before this lunch and learn, and I hope you fed pretty well today. I hope you ate pretty good. Let me tell you this quick story. So my dad, he grew up in the country and kinda country city, but then, moved to the city, but one of the things you learned about people who grew up in the country, they don't really get rid of too much of the country. And so my dad and I were riding together. As a matter of fact, my wife was in the vehicle with us, and, he used one of his country terms. He would always call my wife my daughter. So he said, "Oh, my daughter? Uh, yeah, I need to go ahead and get myself in a position to where I can go ahead and slop y'all, cause y'all probably ready for some of that." And she just looked at him. She just looked at him and said, "What is he talking about?" I just had to go ahead and decode it for you. He's saying, "We're probably hungry, so he wanna go ahead and get himself right and get in a position to stop and get us something to eat." My point to share that is, I hope you got slopped well today. If you got slopped well, if you ate well from this session, go ahead and put it in the chat. Let somebody know you ate well from this session on does balance make sense? I'll share some of them if they come in. Here's what I want you to know. As I was thinking about the session before, let me share this. This is what somebody said about my statement. I thought about it from the perspective of course, I could say so much, but what is it that I really want to leave people with? Somebody said yummy food. First of all, I gotta share this one. Yes, that's what they thought about it today, y'all, some gourmet food. First and foremost, I want it to be communicated that when we talk about family life and business life and the achievement of family business life mastery, it's so important that we don't just limit it to marriage. So many people, as soon as I say, that I help CEOs, business owners, and executives eliminate family life crashing and burning while business life is thriving and vibing, one of the first things they begin to think about is marriage. And that's important, and we'll talk about that, uh, probably at another juncture in the community where, everyone will have an opportunity to be a part of after this challenge. But one thing that I think it's very important for people to know is that family life specifically is about every type of family relationship. You see, there are some people whose marriage is good and their parenting is good, but their relationships with their in-laws is terrible, or the relationship with their parents is terrible, siblings is terrible. Those are important relationships to deal with. And if you're trying to deal with balance, listen to me carefully. You really don't give focus and concern to those relationships. Here's why. Because the priority relationship is the marriage and the children. Those are the ones you have to spend the most time, energy, and efforts with. And to be honest, we tend to deal with our other family members primarily around the holidays, special occasions, and things of that nature. But balance actually eliminates the focus on family in its broad dynamic. We've got to make sure we use the appropriate measures because the appropriate measures include everything that intends to be engaged and utilized, okay? The other thing that must be understood is this: if there's not an appropriate awareness that family life has so many different layers and dynamics that we need to give regard to, we miss valuable growth and development from areas in family life that should prepare us for work life or business life, right? Let me give you an example, a story as I close. I have a cousin who was very close to me. We grew up almost like brothers. So much and so we kinda fought like brothers. We spent a lot of time together, especially during the summer, but also throughout the year because we attended the same church together, specifically because our grandfather was the pastor and our parents attended the church, okay? And so we had a lot of interactions and engagements. Oh, when I tell you we was like some fighting somethings. The truth of the matter is that this cousin of mine, we had so many unique spats to where there were some times I just wanted to do. I don't know if you ever heard of this sermon, by, old time preacher. It was Watch Them Dogs, and he talk about this old Feist terror that would always come off the porch while this master and his Doberman were walking, and he would run down the porch, hit the fence and the gate, and just and one day he came down and his master forgot to close the gate, and he hit that little, gate that opens to get out, and it opened right in front of the Doberman, and the Doberman said, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." That's how I felt about my cousin. I had been waiting for a day for a long time to where I could just put some hands on this brother. Glad that day never came. There was a situation last year in 2021 where my our grandfather passed, and we were having, connection with relatives, actually the younger group that kinda grew up like brothers and sisters. We were getting together and having a time over at my brother's place and got to the situation where one of the other cousins asked me a question, and I was trying to answer his question, but the cousin that, we get into little spats was steady interrupting me. I was like, "Man, I'm trying to answer this man's question." Long story short, I ended up getting up, raising my voice at him, and looking like the fool in the midst. Why? Was it because he was interrupting me? No. Was it because he really didn't care about what I had to say and he felt like what was being said was inadequate? No, it was none of that. It was really because I was trying to be a speaker in an environment where I should have been a conversationalist. See, if I was trying to balance family life, I wouldn't have come away from that situation where this cousin said, "See, the problem with you is you're so literal. You're too literal." I would have come away from that ready to say more to him the next time I saw him rather than evaluating that what he said was very likely true and trying to understand why is it true? Why is it that I responded that way in that situation to actually create that situation? Here's why. It's because I was being a talker rather than a speaker. See, a talker focuses on being heard, and they're all about making sure that their voice is the one that's going, but a speaker receives in order to know what needs to be given. Here's why I say that. Family life cannot just be thought about in the context of marriage and parenting because that family relationship with that particular cousin positioned me to experience a lot of the things I'm experiencing today and the clarity that I have about my assignment in this world and for the people that my assignment is to came because of that cousin. Because that cousin said to me the truth. You're too literal. He said it in a moment where it was hostile and heated, but because of the regard that I had for family life, I took some time to evaluate what somebody in my family who was valuable to me meant, even though they didn't really know. See, you need the value of the different layers of family life because getting ahead of myself, but I'm gonna say it. They actually propel you and posture you to deal with the valuable different layers in business life. Are we gonna get to that when we get to the master keys? And a little bit when we get into the accurate beliefs. But here's what you've gotta know before we go. You need to be vigilant about busting up any and all misleading beliefs that are disrupting your trajectory for mastery in every area of your life. But in regard to family, business, life mastery, we gotta bust up this first one of balance. Does balance make sense? Absolutely not, especially not when it's in the context of work-life balance. Alright, alright. I need some folks in the chat. I need some folks in the chat to let me know how this was. Let me know if it was good. Let me know how good it was. Give me some feedback before we go in these last few minutes. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Give me some things in the chat. Okay, I see some things. Alright. It's good. So, what can you expect? Well, tomorrow morning, we're going to be on our next mastermind experience for day 2. We'll be having Lynn Weaver with awareness elevation, speaker and high performance coach. And let me tell you, she has a story, and we're going to deal with that story. Oh, thank you. Well, I gotta show this one. I gotta show this one, and then I'm gonna show another one too. Look at that. Look at that. We got fire in here. Fire. Yeah, so Vanessa, they actually said it was gonna be fire. Yeah, yeah. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, Linan is going to bring a magnificent story, but our mastermind conversation, I am looking forward to it just emerging with all sorts of magnificence and value. With that said, 6:30 AM Central Standard Time is when we will be on. And remember, this is a transformation challenge for 9 days. Listen, this is gonna be a challenge to get up 6:30 every morning for this. Challenge to be here 12:30 PM Central Standard Time for this. But guess what? While it's a challenge, it's a worthy transformation. Gotta put this up. Bust limiting beliefs. You know, Saul and Vanessa, I like to say this. Let's take that a little further and be a little consistent with what we talked about. Let's bust misleading beliefs. Oh, yes. Yes. Let's bust the misleading beliefs. See, here's the thing. I want to make sure we say this as we get ready to close because we're at the top of our hour and we're getting ready to go out of here. Limiting beliefs, watch this. Limiting beliefs absolutely do restrict us. Mm, but watch this. Misleading beliefs influence us in the wrong way and in the wrong direction. So I like to consider that limiting beliefs are absolutely a problem, but I think the greater culprit is those that are misleading because they're actually influencing and we're going with them. Oh my goodness. At least with the limiting ones, we're stopping. We're not just moving aimlessly or insanely, but with the misleading beliefs, we're being misdirected. You know, it's been said that there's a difference in ignorance and misinformation. Mm. Oh, I gotta close this, so I'm not gonna say too much on it. But there's a difference between ignorance and misinformation. Many people are more misinformed than ignorant. Why? Because we've been sold perspective. We've been taught perspective. We've been influenced by perspective. We've actually observed perspective that we have taken on to be believable, such as work life balance. Work life balance is misinforming. There's not ignorance. We understand that there's something that should be achieved between family life and business life. I'm over here hitting the mic. We understand that there is something that should be achieved between family life and business life. But we first of all don't know to describe it as family life and business life. We actually describe it as work life, which really means we're only focusing on work. That's another conversation. But then to use the measure of balance that is absolutely inconsistent with the nature of family life and business life. We're going to talk about that as we go further in this week and in this challenge. Just know you got to start with busting up the beliefs that are not serving you well in order to get to the place of accessing and making use of the accurate beliefs that will bust them up so that you can position yourself to get the master keys that will unlock that mastery of family life and business life. Listen, y'all be blessed. Y'all take care and y'all get ready for day 2. You hear me now? Leo's out.